routine not in a pejorative sense, but saying these things are kind of like second nature. We don't think about them, and in fact, they might not mean a whole lot to individuals in terms of making religious meaning making, but they do some very important social things. And what do they do? Well, one is that they help to smooth daily life between individuals. So for example, if you were meeting somebody new and you had to introduce yourself and we didn't have the handshake as this cultural convention of meeting and greeting and trusting, then you'd always have to kind of invent it, and that would be very awkward. These rituals then they ensure predictability, that we know what's going to happen in a given situation, which keeps the individual and the social group kind of safe from tension or conflict. And then importantly, these sorts of rituals unite people together, maybe not in the Super Bowl cheering sort of uniting way, but uniting in terms of kind of just keeping cohesion among the social group. Within this understanding of ritual as routine, we can think of some very particular religious rituals that might be routine. We can think of Sabbath worship, how most religious groups have a particular day of the week and a particular ceremony that they do. For example, we might think of the Easter or Passover services that occur within the respectively Christian and Jewish traditions at a certain time of year. And what is it about these sorts of rituals for religious groups? Well, they're predictable. We know that they're coming around if you're a member of one of these religious groups. They unite a group around an idea, a set of behaviors, which doesn't have to be created year after year. It is what it is. It's been passed down through time, and so it kind of brings the group together. It marks the passage of time for these religious groups, so they can kind of order their universe and their personal lives. And these rituals also continue relationships of hierarchy and power. So there's certain roles in terms of like priest or rabbi, certain leaders, roles for children maybe, roles for adults, and so they provide a great deal of kind of cohesion and continuity. So this is one way of looking at rituals, is seeing them as routine. And as I mentioned, it kind of comes from a Goffman sense in which rituals aren't seen as kind of these places of creativity and emotional power as they are for the next theorist. And this is what I call rituals as unpredictable. And we think of Victor Turner's reading here that was assigned for Tuesday. And Turner has this really key idea that he basically divides society's time, if you will, into two states of being. One state is called structure. This is normal time, when roles and relationships and behaviors are very predictable. We know what's going to occur for roles, relationships throughout time in society. But this other time in society, for Victor Turner, he calls communitas. Or sometimes he writes that when he says this word communitas, he's not talking about a particular group of people, but he's talking about a moment in an individual's life or in a society's life when structure, the norms of structure and the relationships of structure no longer exist. And so it's kind of this, if you will, middle period for a society when creativity can happen and things actually begin to look a lot different than they do during the time of structure. So for Turner then, there are these key rituals that actually kind of induce communitas and induce an unpredictable time. And these are things like rites of passage, which I mentioned on that chart that I showed you before on the computer monitor. Rites of passage, especially for some groups that really do intense rites of passage, basically take an individual, put them oftentimes into a separate space or a separate set of responsibilities, and tell those individuals that are in this separate space to basically begin to discover themselves in a kind of a sense of the world and a sense of society that's different than kind of your everyday routines. Maybe a more concrete example for us would be to think of something like religious pilgrimage. So for example, within Islam, the rule to basically at some point in your life go to Mecca, to take a pilgrimage to Mecca. Or we might even think of, like, for example, coming up for you all, spring break, right? So hold with me for a second here. What we know about each of these rites of passage, pilgrimages, and spring break is that things are totally different. We go into a different space. We oftentimes operate with a different sense of time. Our relationship with individuals becomes altered. Usually we feel more of a sense of equality. Oftentimes people say, you know, I was much able more to be myself when I was on a pilgrimage or when I was on spring break. The truer me and the truer relationship of you and me came to light during those times. So for Turner, rituals can be this kind of entree or this opening into communitas, which is this unpredictable time and moment in an individual and society's life that for Turner can produce new insight and creativity and kind of bring people in a society back to life. Finally, and this is where I'll spend a little bit more of my time, we have Durkheim. And Durkheim, I argue, is basically saying that rituals can and are oftentimes one or the other. So let me take you through here a little bit. So for Durkheim, rituals may be routine. In other words, a group comes together to do these rituals, but they're unpredictable in the way that they can, in the way that what happens during them can bring a society together in new ways and kind of re-energize people towards new meanings and new understandings of the world that can shift the way a society and individuals operate in the times of life when they're not inside of rituals. So oftentimes for Durkheim, ritual is kind of the set-aside moment, but as I'm arguing, it's by being set aside that makes it a little bit routine, but also through Durkheim's description, we also see that ritual is unpredictable. So let me take you a little bit through here. First off, we have to catch Durkheim's provocative, and I say provocative on purpose because his argument really was provocative, kind of shook up a lot of people at the time. And most of you got this in your critical reading assignment, but I want to make sure you got it. Durkheim basically argues that beliefs, or what he calls totems, this is one example of a belief, totems. So beliefs and ritual arise together. They're kind of tangled together. And in his examples, he uses totemism, which is a primitive form of religion, as an example of a kind of a belief or a symbol. So if you think of tribes or clans that have maybe, for example, like an eagle or a zebra as their totem, as the symbol of the clan. And he uses the gathering of these groups as the ritual. For us, to make a little bit of sense of this, we can substitute maybe, for example, the American flag as the totem or symbol of our group, and say, for example, the national anthem or civic holidays as the moments of ritual for our group, when we were particularly focused on that flag and kind of bring ourselves together as a group. And what Durkheim is saying is that this idea, this symbol, this totem, this flag in our case, in and of itself has no meaning. In and of itself, it's not been brought down on high from the gods, but instead, and this is what's really provocative, is actually the externalization of the social group's own power and own sense of itself. So let me explain this really a little bit more. Basically, what Durkheim is saying is if a social group kind of comes together in moments of ritual, this social group kind of has like a buzz to it, which I'll put with these electric sparks. And this buzz has a way of kind of projecting itself out onto an idea or totem or a flag. And this idea, this totem, this flag, basically starts to contain what it contains, or what it means is all that the group kind of feels about itself, all that holds this group together. And as I've said before, that symbol has no intrinsic meaning, and the symbol always has the possibility of dying away. If you remember the first time we read Durkheim, he talked about the gods basically can kind of die away, or the gods are dependent on people, just as people think they're dependent on the gods. And he says this basically because if we think of an idea of God, we'll say God's out here, this is God,